players can only defeat him or die. Not to mention the terrifying HP Lord level. Just these 3 words are enough to make players tremble. This represents that the monster is terrifying in some aspect. It could be power, or simply the terrifying momentum exuded by the fallen lord. Snowbite does not want to give up. Darkblade, I know you have special information. What are our odds of winning against this boss? After a moment of silence, Fengshe suddenly spoke with an unpleasant expression on his face. I'm sorry. There may be some issues with the information I have here. This is the final boss of the first team dungeon in the Realm world. It is also the most powerful boss currently accessible to players. Fengshe couldn't help but fall into contemplation as he looked at the Lord-level boss. With level 6 HP 120,000, logically, Pachiro should not appear in this stage, right? He furrowed his brow tighter as he thought more. If it wasn't for a deviation in past memories, then it must be our group of pioneers. In the progress of the game, we are far ahead of the previous life. Therefore, some stage data has not been adjusted yet. Luna Zhao saw Fengshe silent and couldn't help but mutter with an unpleasant expression on her face. Finished? Even the most resourceful one can't come up with a strategy. If I have to choose a way to die, I might as well commit suicide. Being killed by a monster would be too painful. Just then, Fengshe suddenly turned around and said, We can try using Crossfire. If Miss Bai and I join forces with 2 DPS players to switch the battle, we should have some chance. I wonder if Miss Bai still knows how to defeat the boss. Luna Zhao's eyes immediately showed a hint of shock at the words. She quickly looked at Fengshe and asked, What is that? Fengshe calmly explained, Using Crossfire tactics. Perhaps there is a 20% chance of defeating this guy. Upon hearing that there was only a 20% chance of success, Luna Zhao couldn't help shaking her head and commented, With such a low success rate, how is that any different from suicide? Snowbye, with a demeanor as cold as an iceberg, finally showed a hint of curiosity. Since wiping out the team here is a high probability event, why not take a chance with this 20% opportunity? Please elaborate. Fengshe then began to explain. Crossfire. This is a technique specifically used to combat bosses. First, have melee team members engage the boss to draw aggro. After drawing aggro, immediately move the boss away and stop attacking. Switch to using only ranged team members for DPS. When the ranged DPS is strong enough to draw monster aggro, immediately stop melee attacks and move closer. Pull the aggro back forcefully. Repeat this alternation. The tactical focus is to maximize the distance with the monster to ensure the safety of ranged team members. After Fengshe finished explaining, Snowbye's expression changed immediately as she spoke up. The words sound simple, but they seem completely impractical. It's easy to say for the ranged team members, but how can us melee fighters avoid being touched by the monsters? How is it possible not to be touched by the monsters? As Fengshe turned and looked directly at the boss indifferently, he said, Now there are only 3 melee team members left in the team, Snowbye, Coke, and me. Be prepared to make sacrifices. Snowbye and Coke's pupils suddenly shrank at the sound. At this point, we can only go all out. Luna Zhao suddenly scolded Fengshe on the side. Darkblade, are you crazy? It's one thing if it's just you, but now you want to use your teammates as cannon fodder too. Just then, Coke suddenly walked up to Luna Zhao and interrupted, saying, I will listen to my big brother. Then he suddenly patted the armor on his body firmly and spoke out loud. As long as Big Brother speaks, I will not hesitate to brave the perilous journey. After some calm contemplation, Snowbye spoke decisively. If the body-devouring serpent can become a member of the first Dun Dark Moon Graveyard team, I am willing to sacrifice myself as the captain. Subsequently, Snowbye walked to Fengshe's side and calmly said, Darkblade, for now, I will lend you my life. Her decisive actions made Fengshe couldn't help but cast a glance at her. The tactic proposed by this man has only a 20% chance of success. Snowbye, on the other hand, decisively agreed to this bold tactic. Seeing Snow Bai nod in agreement, indicating that she was willing to take this risk, Feng Shi couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. Although Snow Bai's personality can be a bit harsh, she is absolutely responsible when it comes to her guide. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she is a pillar of strength. And Snow Bai suddenly drew out the long sword from her waist. She began to gather power to activate skill while shouting loudly, "Everyone, prepare to charge and achieve victory, or meet your end bravely." Just as her words fell, a faint light began to envelop Snow Bai. She then took the lead and rushed out from her original position. She headed straight towards Pachiro. However, just as Snow Bai approached the strange magic circle on the ground, Pachiro's tightly closed eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing blood-red pupils. Its gaze immediately locked onto Snow Bai. Then, a crisp sound was heard as Pachiro suddenly gripped the blood-red rune longsword tightly, ready to launch an attack. Feng Shi keenly noticed this change and quickly shouted, "Be careful! The boss is about to make a move!" At the same time, Snow Bai's graceful figure had already flown in front of Pachiro. But Pachiro suddenly picked up the blood-red great sword in his hand. A crimson sword aura shot towards Snow Bai immediately. The next moment, the sharp sword aura directly struck Snow Bai. She instantly staggered and stood still in place. In the blink of an eye, the hit Snow Bai seemed like a phantom, quickly dissipated on the spot. Immediately followed by a sound coming from the upper right side of Pachiro. Just saw Snow Bai raising a long sword suddenly flashed out. Pachiro couldn't help but look back in surprise at the sound. Just then, Snow Bai quickly swung the long sword in her hand. The sharp sword aura fiercely struck down on Pachiro's head. A bright sharp sound burst out, and Snow Bai landed gracefully without any damage. Pachiro, who was injured, immediately locked his gaze on something. Snow Bai's body erupted with a burst of angry roaring. Snow Bai quickly turned around and shouted loudly behind him. Attracted the first wave of aggro. "Ranged team, it's up to you now." As soon as the words fell, Kuriko, who had already started silently chanting his powerful skill, he suddenly plunged the staff in his hand into the ground. A burst of furious fire energy immediately surged out from his body. Immediately, a fierce pillar of fire suddenly shot up from the ground, engulfing Pachiro's massive body within it. The flames continued to scorch and strike against it. And Luna Xiao, seeing this, disdainfully said, "Are you trying to tickle him? Watch me." As soon as the words fell, Luna Xiao waved her big hand. A tremendously hot giant fireball suddenly smashed down from the sky. Having just regained mobility, Pachiro found himself once again engulfed in an even more ferocious flame storm. Kuriko couldn't help but exclaim as he felt the shockwave of the explosion. This should be quite tough for him now. And Luna Xiao, with a serious expression on her face, spoke up. "This thing has 12,000 HP. We still have a long way to go." As soon as he finished speaking, Pachiro exerted force with his strong thighs. His massive body lifted the crimson great sword and burst out directly from the center of the explosion. Just as Pachiro was about to go after Kuriko and Luna Xiao, Feng Shi, who had been lurking nearby, finally made a move. He picked up the long sword in his hand and suddenly flashed out from behind Pachiro. The next moment, the long sword fell suddenly. Feng Shi's sword fiercely chopped down on Pachiro's heel. Immediately Pachiro staggered under his feet. The speed of running slowed down instantly. Feng Shi immediately spoke up, saying, "I've debuffed him with a 50% reduction in speed with one stroke. Ranged group, get ready to dodge." However, at this moment, Pachiro suddenly vigorously lifted his injured foot. Kuriko, seeing this, couldn't help but ask, "What is he trying to do?" The next moment, Pachiro's large foot heavily landed on the ground. A majestic surge of energy immediately began churning underground. The entire area instantly shattered with a loud noise. Kuriko and Luna Xiao were caught off guard. They were immediately shaken by the impact, unable to even stand steadily, let alone run away. Immediately after that, Pachiro picked up the giant sword and started moving quickly, even though his speed was reduced by 50%. But Luna Zhao had already lost the opportunity to escape at this moment. Feng Shi saw the situation and immediately shouted at Luna Zhao. "The boss is calling you out. Quickly move aside." While Kuriko and Luna Zhao were already enveloped by an inexplicable energy, Luna Zhao couldn't help but respond in despair. "We can't move. We have been affected by his freezing debuff." This terrifying skeleton colossus with formidable combat power. It only takes a casual step to crush. Just two people hiding not far away were frantically rushing towards him. The magic-wielding masters of magic were forbidden to move by the crazily thrown skill, only to see Pachiro stepped out, causing the brick to shatter. He suddenly wielded the blood-red giant sword in his hand. He threw the big sword towards Kuriko and Luna Zhao. As the large sword spun closer, a deafening roar erupted immediately. A gust of wind swept through the entire hall. Luna Zhao, who was trapped, couldn't help but exclaim at the sight. "I don't want to stay here!" However, just at that moment, Feng Shi, who activated the gravity release, quickly rushed out from not far away. He directly stood in front of Luna Zhao. Feng Shi did not hesitate at all. He directly activates his only life-saving skill, Heaven-Defying Sword. With a wave of his large hand, several dazzling light swords suddenly appeared. Feng Shi's skill repelled the blood-red giant sword coming towards him, sending it bouncing away with terrifying force. The massive sword flipped through the air for over 10 meters before landing. At the moment when the giant sword landed, the stone brick instantly made a bursting sound. Soon after, there was a thud. Feng Shi's feet went soft, and he suddenly knelt down on the ground, only to see the light sword entwined around Feng Shi rapidly dissipating. And he knelt down on the ground, his whole face filled with pain. Although he managed to block the giant sword, he also suffered massive injuries. Coke and Kuriko quickly ran to Feng Shi's side when they saw the situation. They became increasingly worried. At this moment, Feng Shi's face was clearly showing pain and reluctance. Snowbai watched Feng Shi standing for a long time without getting up, and couldn't help but feel a moment of confusion. An ominous premonition suddenly rose in her heart. She immediately showed a look of disbelief. The first one to fall. Was it actually Darkblade? Although Feng Shi blocked that sword with the Heaven-Defying Sword, he still had his health points depleted. He couldn't help but feel unwilling as he watched his body slowly dissipate. Is it going to end here? However, at this moment, little Aurora suddenly reached out and held Feng Shi's dissipating hand. At the same time, a faint green light appeared, enveloping the two of them, only to see little Aurora chanting inexplicable and mysterious spells with her mouth. Feng Shi's body immediately started to emanate a green light, and his HP began to visibly recover at an astonishing speed. Feeling his condition improving, Feng Shi couldn't help but express his surprise. "Little Aurora, what are you doing?" And after casting the spell, little Aurora finally looked up. She explained with a calm smile. "This is the resurrection magic that I just learned. Darkblade, big brother. You must not stay here." Feng Shi quickly stood up and thanked. "Little Aurora, thank goodness for you. The resurrection magic that can only be used once every 24 hours. Heaven is not forsaking me." At the same time, Pachiro had already walked to the blood-red giant sword, pulling the firmly embedded sword out of the ground. Feng Shi quickly spoke up to warn. "Watch your positioning. It has retrieved its weapon." As soon as the words fell, Coke suddenly struck his shield with the long sword in his hand. At the same time, he shouted loudly at Pachiro. "Hello. Come on over." When Coke saw that Pachiro seemed not to have heard at all, still standing in place, he couldn't help but be surprised and asked, "Why isn't the taunt skill working?" And at this moment, Snowbai also started to move. She quickly rushed behind Pachiro. Her long sword in hand was swung continuously. The sharp sword aura kept blasting onto Pachiro's back. But when the system indicated that Pachirio's current aggro was 0, Snow Bai's face immediately turned ugly. Aggro couldn't be transferred at all. When she lifted her head up, immediately saw that Pachirio had actually locked his gaze on Feng Shi. She couldn't help but feel secretly astonished. Why was it only staring at Darkblade? On Feng Shi's side, a system prompt sounded as well. You have been locked by Pachirio. Aggro will not transfer until your death. He couldn't help but ponder secretly in his heart. So that's how it is. We've already reduced Pachirio's HP to below half. It has entered the second phase. Thinking of this, Feng Shi immediately shouted, "Everyone, go all-out DPS on Pachirio, don't worry about aggro," and he quickly unleashed the illusionary strike formation. The 4 shadow clones instantly condensed in the blink of an eye. He immediately signaled for the clones to start moving around Pachirio's surroundings, causing those nearby to ponder silently. Pachirio's behavior in the second phase was being considered. It would continue to hunt down high-value targets on the field until the target's death. This meant that it would only attack me next. This was a great opportunity. And Pachirio's pair of eerie crimson eye sockets. A hint of confusion flashed through them. With several identical targets, he was a bit unsure which one to pursue. Just then, a blazing flame crashed down onto Pachirio. It exploded directly on his body, instantly erupting in a loud roar. Luna Zhao quickly cast a spell while speaking to Kuriko. "Darkblade's sidekick, can you make some effort?" Kuriko then expressed that he had put in all his effort. Snow Bai and Coke were also not idle, continuously using their various skills and attacking Pachirio with melee attacks. Feng Shi stood not far away, manipulating shadow clones, while quietly contemplating. Originally, Pachirio, who could only lock onto one person, is now being disrupted by 4 identical targets. The AI's nearest targeting principle causes it to continuously adjust its target to the nearest one. As long as my clones keep adjusting their proximity, the boss might even get stuck in place unable to move. Under Feng Shi's manipulation and everyone's siege, Pachirio is being beaten in a very helpless manner. Pachirio, who was brutally beaten, suddenly stood up straight. A sudden series of shockwaves began to rapidly spread out, and the shadow clone hovering not far from Pachirio was instantly blasted to pieces by this skill. Feng Shi's face immediately turned ugly upon seeing this. Here it comes. Pachirio's final stage. This man is facing a Lord-level boss. He relied on illusionary strike to directly reduce its health by half. However, just at that moment, Pachirio suddenly enters the final stage of frenzy. But under Feng Shi's command and continuous coordinated attacks, Pachirio is also being helplessly beaten. HP keeps decreasing, retreating step by step, unable to bring out true strength, always in a passive state. Feng Shi suddenly reminded Snow Bai. In the final stage, Pachirio's reaction speed and desire to attack are much stronger than before. His Death Drain ability can restore 1/10 of his HP every time he kills a player. In other words, if someone is killed by him, all our efforts will be in vain. Upon hearing this, Snow Bai's face instantly turned ugly. Then it has to be done in a way that doesn't kill anyone at all. We are entering the final stage. Later, Feng Shi shouted in the team chat. Stop DPS immediately. Do not heal. Do not pull aggro. Snow Bai also ordered that all members of the body-devouring serpent retreat outside the boss battle circle. No one is allowed to enter the battle. Luna Zhao immediately waved her hand and said, "Everyone step back. Execute the guild master's command." Quickly, except for Feng Shi and Snow Bai, all the other players retreated outside the battlefield. The team battle turned into a duel between the two of them and the boss with low health. Meanwhile, Pachirio's blood-red giant sword in his hand started swinging wildly. The blood-red great sword was like a tornado, engulfing everything. Anything touched by it turned into ashes. And Feng Shi, with a foresight-like prediction, agilely moved to avoid it. After dodging the attack, Feng Shi immediately raised the Abyss Dweller in his hand and shouted, I have experienced your attack routine many times. As soon as the words fell, Fengshe suddenly swung a storm flash. 3 lightning bolts struck directly at Pachiro, causing a total of over 600 points of damage. Injured Pachiro immediately targeted Fengshe. Snowbai, who was waiting for an opportunity, swiftly picked up the long sword and flashed behind Pachiro. Immediately after, Snowbai forcefully stomped her foot. She leaped up directly, and Pachiro's aggro was steadily held by Fengshe. It did not notice that the long sword had been picked up. Attacked Snowbai behind itself. Snowbai then fiercely stabbed with the long sword in hand. The attack landed on a gap in Chirio's armor around the neck, causing a high damage of 608 points. Pachirio was continuously hit. Its footing staggered immediately. It stabilized itself after regaining balance. It immediately reached out to grab its Snowbai. The next moment, Pachirio's big hand quickly grabbed Snowbai's willow waist, while Snowbai couldn't help but frown slightly. I didn't expect Pachirio to actually change its attack style. Immediately followed by a bang sound, Pachirio exerted force with its hand. It violently slammed Snowbai onto the ground, and Snowbai hadn't had a chance to get up yet. But what greeted her was Pachirio's giant foot coming towards her face. However, at that moment, Fengshe decisively raised his hand and used the gravity release skill. Suddenly, a miniature vortex void appeared in his hand. Immediately, Snowbai felt her whole body lighten. The gravity release skill was bestowed upon her. The next moment, Pachirio's huge foot thundered down, and Snowbai, under the blessing of gravity release, narrowly avoided this terrifying stomp. After Fengshe unleashed the skill, he immediately started charging to take over the boss. Just as the two of them brushed past each other, Fengshe suddenly spoke up and reminded, "I will make the final blow. You step back." This woman attracted the attention of the boss, while her teammates drew aggro. She took the opportunity to raise her hand and stab at the boss's neck. But the next second, she was grabbed by Pachirio and thrown away fiercely. Then there was a loud thud. Snowbai flipped and twisted in the air, landing steadily. At the same time, Fengshe naturally wouldn't be polite. He immediately launched a counterattack. He decisively took out the fire element enchanting scroll from his backpack and used it to enchant his weapon with the fire element, turning his long sword into a sword of flame. Pachirio quickly pulled out the giant red sword that was stuck in the ground when he saw this. At the same time, it let out a cold roar. "Mortals, your challenge is nothing but seeking your doom." And at this moment, Fengshe had already flown above Pachilio. He shouted loudly, "Bring it on!" His hands unleashed his most powerful skill, Demon Sword Flowing Blade Fire Dance. Pachirio was already too late to block. Flowing Blade Fire Dance accurately struck the armor on Pachirio's head. However, Fengshe's attack was blocked by the solid armor on its body. And Fengshe saw the sudden appearance of red flowing light on Pachirio's body. His heart couldn't help but skip a beat. This is the shield skill. They could see victory within their grasp. Fengshe increased the strength in his hands, with a look of unwillingness on his face. He attempted to break through that protective shield. Next second, the duration of Flowing Blade Fire Dance ended. But that sharp sword light did not cause any substantial harm to Pachirio. Fengshe decisively used the nine-headed dragon strike in the air, and Abyss Dweller appeared next to him instantly. He knew that the enchanting power had been exhausted. The only way to win now was to rely on swordsmanship. Immediately after that, he swung out the nine-headed dragon strike. 9 dark sword energies cut through the air and swept towards Pachirio. Instantly, 9 heads sprouted on Pachirio's head in a row. The damage value reached over 100 points. Under the bombardment of Abyss Dweller, Pachirio's HP keeps decreasing. It looks like there is less than 1% of HP left. However, it is at this moment that the wounded Pachirio truly becomes enraged. With a roar, the entire mausoleum hall begins to tremble. This is his final move, deathly dread, causing enemies within a 20-yard radius to be knocked into the air. Meanwhile, Snowbye, who is lurking nearby, seizes the opportunity and swiftly moves forward with a push of their foot. She flies directly towards Pachiro. Snowbye immediately unleashes Flame Slash as she flashes out. The Flame Spirit Great Sword instantly transforms into a sword of flames. She couldn't help but shout, "Take this, Pachiro! It's time for my body-devouring serpent to finish you off!" However, at this moment, Fengshe anxiously shouted out, "Don't attack!" The next second, the fierce Flame Slash ruthlessly landed on Pachiro's armor. However, he did not get hurt. Instead, a powerful rebound force emerged. Immediately following, the long sword in Snowbye's hand was shattered by this terrifying power, sending her flying and becoming vulnerable without a weapon. At this moment, Snowbye saw the terrifying destructive power. She couldn't help but be shocked, breaking out in a cold sweat. She looked incredulously at the broken sword in her hand, murmuring to herself, "How could this happen?" And Pachiro revealed a humanizing smirk. It suddenly picked up the blood-red giant sword in its hand and said coldly, "Your life. I'll take it." As soon as the words fell, the blood-red giant sword slammed down. And all of this happened too quickly. Snowbye didn't even have time to react. Fengshe, who had already taken action, quickly flew to her back. He watched anxiously as the giant sword was about to fall. "You absolutely cannot die." The woman intended to take down the boss with low health to get the first down. But she was stunned on the spot instead. Snowbye, whose weapon was shattered, looked at the giant sword rushing towards her. She was immediately stunned in place. Even if Fengshe had sprinted with all his might when Snowbye was being countered. But he couldn't help but think to himself that it was not good. He couldn't catch up. However, at this moment, Fengshe suddenly felt a tremor in his body. This sudden change took him by surprise. Immediately following, he felt his body. It seemed that some strange changes had occurred. This familiar scene couldn't help but make his pupils constrict. This is it. Only to see the latest virtual device he was wearing, there was a trace of electric current. The data transmission pipe behind him kept making a sizzling sound. The electric current kept flowing into his body. The powerful current immediately caused Fengshe's body to tremble. The system promptly sounded an alert. Fault warning. Abnormal overload of current. The system detected abnormality in the neural connection points. Consciousness synchronization rate significantly increased. Anomaly in character data. The next moment, the prompt sounds again. Virtual characters and player consciousness are synchronized, exceeding the peak value. Fengshe was startled as soon as he heard the sound. He didn't expect to activate overclocking mode so quickly. At the same time, in the game, Fengshe stomped his foot violently. He immediately burst out with an extremely powerful force. Even the ground couldn't withstand his tremendous force and suddenly shattered. And his body was already surrounded by bursts of purple lightning. Majestic power filled his entire body. Then the system prompted with a message. Overclocking mode activated. Fengshe seemed accustomed to it. Intense fighting spirit emanated from his eyes as he locked onto Pachiro. The next moment, a loud bang echoed. Fengshe leaped forward, shortening the distance to the boss by dozens of meters with a terrifying force. Just as Pachiro's giant sword was about to strike Snowbye's head, Fengshe's Abyss Dweller suddenly swung out of thin air, blocking the fatal blow. Snowbye saw Fengshe suddenly appear out of nowhere to save her. Snowbye couldn't help but show a look of horror. What's going on? She looked at Fengshe standing in front of her in shock. How did he suddenly appear? Even Pachiro couldn't help but be amazed. How could you possibly come from such a faraway place, kid? And Fengshe just gave him an indifferent look and responded with a sentence. Overclocking of thinking. I say you also do not understand. Next, Fengshe unleashed Abyss Bind. 9 jet black chains instantly bound Pachiro. The chains immobilized it completely. Fengshe quickly drew back the long sword. He assumed a stance, ready to reap the remaining blood from Pachiro. Fengshe knows that the overclocking mode cannot be sustained for too long. He immediately picked up his long sword and began to launch an attack. Afterwards, Fengshe went on a wild chopping spree against Pachiro. His sword strikes landed on the boss's weak spot. He drew his sword at an astonishing speed. In just 2.5 seconds, Fengshe's fierce attack took away the remaining HP of Pachiro, causing him to fall to the ground with a thud. Kuriko was left speechless by this amazing performance. How did Feng achieve that just now? On the other hand, Coke was also looking confused, shaking his head to indicate that he didn't know either. A fierce attack left Pachiro with only a sliver of HP left. Fengshe then slowly got up and dispelled the power of Abyss Dweller. He couldn't help but look at his own body and secretly pondered. Overclocking would cause synchronous damage to players in the real world. Therefore, it was early disabled by the game developers. But it should be because I used the latest equipment that I accidentally entered overclocking mode. Just then, a resentful voice suddenly came from Pachiro. Damn it. What is the cost of your sudden enhancement? And Fengshe walked over indifferently, responding beside him. Both the in-game character and the actual person will suffer the same injuries. If the in-game character dies, the player in reality will also suffer brain death. But let me say this. This price is simply too light. He couldn't help but recall everything he had dedicated to Shadow back then. Then, he was forced to terminate the contract. Even his own account was cancelled, and he was told to get out of Guide. Even in his past life, he crossed over due to alcoholism caused by this. Fengshe suddenly came to his senses. He quickly grabbed Abyss Dweller, ready to end the battle. In this life, no matter what the cost, he must become stronger. The next second, Abyss Dweller turned into a lightning bolt, slashing at Pachiro's neck, directly beheading his skull with one sword strike, instantly completing the kill. Shortly after, the system prompt sounded. Player Darkblade killed Pachiro. Player Darkblade received the reward for killing the legendary boss Pachiro, one ancient king of the Sacred Land treasure chest. After solving the boss, everyone walked into the teleportation array one by one. They disappeared in the grand hall of the tomb. And the teleportation portal at the entrance of the dungeon opened wide at the same time. Immediately after, a regional notification sounded. The first done team has appeared in the Dark Moon Graveyard. Congratulations to Body-Devouring Serpent and Zero Wings. Players at the entrance of the dungeon were taken aback upon hearing the system announcement, followed by cheers and excitement. The area of Dark Moon Graveyard suddenly exploded. It's unbelievable that a clearing team has appeared so quickly. And when some little gaggas saw the first done team, they couldn't help but be astonished. If it were a well-known studio like Body-Devouring Serpent that cleared the level, it would be barely believable. But what on earth is Zero Wings? I don't recognize this Zero Wings at all. However, being able to appear on this leaderboard, they must have a big background. While the leader of Shadow was even more uncontrollably angry at this time. He angrily shouted at Flame Tiger, "How are our Shadow's tactics going? It seems like we are still stuck at the first level. We are currently urgently preparing to bring in backup personnel." Shadow immediately stretched out his hand after listening, pushing Flame Tiger away angrily. "Get out of my way," he said. Then he left with a face full of unwillingness, gritting his teeth. He only left behind a sentence. "You guys are really a bunch of useless people."